Welcome, everyone, to our talks on Tuesday. Hope you all enjoyed your Labor Day. We are so excited that you can be here with us today. We are going to talk all about atomic joint plans with our colleague Lorelei Pisha. Just so everyone knows, we will be utilizing the poll feature today and the chat feature, but don't worry, we will give you directions as it is time. If you have any questions at any time for Lorelei, feel free to drop them in the chat. She'll be monitoring, and if there's anything she missed, we'll revisit them at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to you, Lorelei. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Lisa. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm usually behind the scenes for these talks on Tuesday webinars, so this is a real treat for me to actually get to share a passion project of mine with you. Atomic joint planning has become a real hallmark tool in both my professional and my personal lives, and I hope that you find it useful too. So we're going to go ahead and dig in because we have a lot to talk about. This is just my headshot from a while back, it looks like. All right, so just to lay some context and to ground us, the content of this Talks on Tuesdays is aligned with professional competencies and frameworks for early intervention practitioners. For starters, the topic is aligned with the Division for Early Childhood's F5 practice. Petitioners support family functioning, promote confidence and competence, and strengthen family-child relationships. It's also aligned with the Knowledge and Skills for Service Coordinators, Competency 2.3, about promoting engagement and family capacity building. So we're going to be talking a lot about that capacity building part in terms of families being able to meet their priorities. And then we're also aligned with the pyramid model framework's key practices, particularly building partnerships with families. All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to examine the relationship between evidence-based interventions in the home and habit formation. We're going to use a cognitive neuroscience lens to understand why, where, and how habits are formed. I call this Habit Science 101. And then we're going to apply findings from habit science research to the coaching process. All right, so what are atomic habits and why am I using this term? So before I give you that definition, I'm going to share some context for how this developed. I'm going to take you all the way back to 2018. You may remember this book came out. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was a big deal back then. At the time, I remember seeing it on my husband's nightstand and thinking, yeah, he definitely needs that book. But me, I'm good. But then 2020 hit with the pandemic, and so many of my habits changed in pandemic life. In the fall of 2021, when we all had to get kids back to school and their activities, start re-engaging face-to-face at work, and so many more things, the habits I developed during the pandemic were no longer serving me well. That's when I took this book off that bedside table, undusted it, and dug in. I learned that atomic habits, as defined by the author here, James Clear, are just small decisions you make and small actions you perform every day that lead to powerful changes across time. And then I also started looking at, from other authors and other research, started looking at what the research base was behind the process for building habits. Even though I found habit formation useful in my own life, the real excitement for me was in discovering that habit science could be a tool for addressing some of the sticky points or challenging situations that can arise with coaching families in early intervention. We're going to launch a poll, and it's going to ask you to consider and to respond to if you've ever dealt with any of these challenging situations or been challenged by them yourself as an early intervention provider. You can choose more than one. Families repeatedly forgetting or to report that they're too busy to try out the joint plans that they had seemed so motivated and geared up to do. Family members starting to disengage or just not engaging during key components of the coaching process. Or a family member just forgetting your visit altogether, seeming surprised when you arrived, and it kind of taking them a while to get in the process. All right, let's see if some folks still responding. So yeah, remember you can do more than one. Yeah, so it looks like lots of us are challenged by, or find it challenging and maybe hard to find good strategies to support families when they're unable to implement that between visit plan. Yeah, many of us also, I definitely feel you and hear a lot about the struggle to get families engaged in that process. And then also kind of with no shows, that the forgetful opponent that can come with scheduling and a family not being prepared to see you. Just sharing the results. So that's what got me super excited, is when I was reading through this book and I started thinking, aha, this is it's really hard for me as coming out of the pandemic to, even with my routine-based intervention lens, to be able to figure out ways to, even though I know how to embed opportunities into my work, I was unable to do things like I would forget, my kids' vitamins. I would forget to turn my child's expander at night, even though I'd already set it up and thinking about I'll do this after that. I was still unable to do it. And I knew that I was experiencing this, that families I was working with were experiencing the same thing. So what I want to do is walk you through how we can use this idea of habit formation to actually help families be able to be more successful and build up their capacity to do these joint plans. We know that participation during the coaching process is essential for building the family's capacity to embed strategies we try out during early intervention sessions into their daily lives. And this is important because we know that what families do between visits, that's actually where the magic happens, right? That's where development happens. And that's where the capacity building happens, is right there between the visits. You'll notice that I use the term, not just atomic habits, but I use the term atomic joint habits in the title for today's webinar. And so that we're all on the same page about why I'm using that. I'm using that phrase. So I'm defining atomic joint plans as small actions embedded within the joint plan routine itself that happen, and we're talking about the joint routine, the joint plan that happens at the end of sessions. Where the provider helps the family really flesh out what they plan to do to support their priorities between early intervention visits. Joint plans are an essential part of the coaching process because they're a tool for really helping families support their child's development and participation in those everyday family routines. Kind of two of the really kind of foundational approaches to coaching that we use in early intervention both include the joint plan. It just shows you how pivotal the joint plan is in the early intervention coaching process. So with Rush and Sheldon, they define the joint plan, or they talk about what the coach does is the coach ends every coaching conversation with a plan of who is going to do what by when based on the actions and ideas discussed. And then the family guided routine-based intervention approach developed by Julianne Woods and her colleagues encourages the early intervention provider at the end to engage the caregiver to lead a development of a best plan of action for embedding interventions in multiple routines and activities throughout the day. So both kind of the real foundational evidence-based approaches to coaching and early intervention include this joint plan at the end of a coaching session. And another thing that I want to bring to your attention as we're kind of just getting our foundation is why I'm interchangeably using the term habit and routine. And that's because really a habit by any other name is actually a routine. There's synonyms for each other. And that also really had me thinking. When you look up habit or you look up routine in your Google phone and look for the definition, what pops up under synonyms or similar words, they're a synonym for each other. So that's because, right, they're an activity or an action or a practice with a specific set of actions regularly followed. And that's why they work so well, right? For us to be able to help families think in terms of their routines and activities as ways to trigger or cue a learning opportunity or an interaction that supports their child's development or participation or independence. However, One of the things I want us to think about with habits, routines, is that we're actually asking families to change those routines. So by asking them to embed a new action or a new activity into an already established activity, it's a great way to cue that they need to do the activity. It's great context for the child. But families, we're actually asking them to change an existing habit or routine. And if any of you have ever tried to change a habit, it's not easy stuff. And I wanted to find out and do some research to find out really why it's so hard to change routines or habits. And that led me to kind of learning the cognitive neuroscience behind why habits are established. So let's get into what I call habit science 1. Why do our brains build habits? That is because habits are actually really adaptive. Our brain built habits so that we can automatize behaviors in an adaptive protective response to environmental stimuli. So that way we can if we have an automated response, something occurs, if X occurs, we do Y, it becomes automated. And when we automate, right, it frees up our cognitive capacity to be able to handle anything new or threatening that might come up in our environment. If we had to think and plan every time we do something that was routine, we'd really have very little free time to be able to solve new threats or look for new problems. And actually, one of the areas that we're going to talk about later that helps us be able to automatize behaviors is actually one of the areas that is kind of first attacked with plaques during Alzheimer's. We know that dementia is actually part of what dementia does is it helps destroy a person's ability to engage in routine and habits. So that's, again, just a way to show how important the automation is to us as humans. So again, when we come in and we see a new stimulus, so if we don't automatize, before a behavior or response is automatized and is a habit, we see something new and we have to decide how to respond. So we encounter a situation, we're unsure that we've encountered this before, we don't have a habit in place, what do we do? So what happens is our brain then tries something out, try behavior, something from something before we think might work. We try that out. If it works, then what happens is we receive a reward. And this is linked to dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that we're going to talk about later when we get into kind of the principles of habit science. So just hold on to that just for now. Think about the idea that we try in response to a stimulus that comes in. We receive a reward because it works. So the next time we see that stimulus, we do the same thing. It begins to prime itself, right? That we see the thing, we do it. And the more we engage in it, the more frequency it happens, then it becomes a habit and we can automate what we're doing. It is really key. So here, you guys have been watching this baby cry over and over again as I talk about why our brains do it. I'm going to give an example. So think about a family brings their baby home for the first time, or they have this wonderful newborn in front of them, right? They have to begin to understand and learn how to interpret those crying cues, right? So the crying is the stimulus that's coming in to the new parent's brain, right? So the parent is the stimulus, interprets it that their baby is crying and that crying is a problem. And then they think of how can I address this, right? We also know that every baby is different, right? So even if it's your second or third or fourth baby, we have to still establish routines and behaviors with this baby in particular, the baby in front of them. So a parent might try swaddling, might try feeding, might try rocking, singing, etc., all in an attempt, right, to calm this baby. When one of these actions, the baby, the parent receives this internal reward, that dopamine kick. The next time the baby cries, the parent's going to try out that same action. If that action works again, this works for this, they're going to try it again and again. And eventually that gets automatized to where parents are able to interpret that particular cry and be able to put in an action that suits a particular baby, while they're able to then do something else. Perhaps then they're able to bounce this baby, because this baby likes to be bounced, while reading a book to their toddler. Or they might have had to just really hone in and focus and tell their toddler to wait a minute, right? So it becomes more automatized, and we're able to then respond to multiple things in our environment. All right, so now we can move this sweet crying baby off of our screen. Whoops, sorry guys, I got slide happy. So let's look at neuroanatomy to begin to think about why and how these habits are actually formed in our neurocircuitry. What you see here is a portrayal of the different, well, this is the brain, but a portrayal of the different areas where senses are perceived in our brain. We often hear a lot about left brain, right brain when we talk about the brain and how it influences behavior. However, neuroscientists who are engaged in understanding habits and mental maps and things like that talk a lot about that it's really more helpful to think about back brain versus front brain, right? So this gives you a way to kind of look at that. So the back brain and front brain, or front and back brain, are separated by the let me see if I can point to it with my, you can see my cursor here, by this line coming down that separates right there. That's the central sulcus, right? So center and kind of valley that separates the back of the brain to the front of the brain. So to the left side on your screen of the somatosensory cortex. And then you'll see back here are the different areas then for when a sensation comes in through the nervous system and then comes into the brain. If it's a sound, it's going to be processed primarily here in the auditory context. Smells come into olfactory. Visual stimuli comes into here, the visual cortex. Taste comes into the gustatory cortex. And this is physical sensation, all right? So, like for example, with the crying baby, right? There's sight and sound, perhaps, for the stimuli that come in. So the auditory hearing that sound, the sound waves that are coming in are then perceived as sensation, as sound in the auditory cortex. And then the visual image of the eyes perceiving the baby crying that we were just watching, that comes in through the visual cortex. And together that's taken to the frontal cortex where, sorry, I'm coming down and changing my slides, to where that information is interpreted and a behavior or a response to that interpretation is initiated. All right. So this is going to be a little hard to understand from explanations, but I'm gonna try. So then I just showed you the side profile, which is this one right here of the brain, right? Now imagine that we take our head here and we slice right down the center here. And then we have this left chunk of the brain. So under my skull, you've got this left chunk of the brain. That's what's showing, the outside of that part is showing here. And the inside, what you would see if you took that chunk and opened it up and rotated it out, that's what you would be seeing here. So now I'm going to go through and talk with you about some of these areas. And so we can look and see kind of how they are helping us then make that, turning that perception into an interpretation and into a response. So this is the prefrontal cortex up here. It's going to consider what actions need to be taken given one's current context. And it's using a set of networks in the brain called the dorsal attention network. And for visual input and visual attention, the areas of the dorsal attention network are here in blue. I'll help you to see where they are. And this is actively interpreting novel stimuli, novel visual stimuli that comes in. The brain is thinking, is seeing that baby for a new parent and is thinking, what do I do? For me, I remember the first thinking of reflux, like vomiting, projectile reflux. What do I do? That visual, like, and then that being a new problem that was requiring a lot of my cognitive capacity to think through. I didn't have a planned response. But however, after you've engaged in that same activity, you've gotten that same stimulus, and you've given that a response to that stimulus that has given you a reward, that has solved your problem, and you've done that over and over and over. When it automatizes, it moves into an area of the brain called the default mode network. It moves out of this dorsal attention network into the default mode network, right? So that default mode here is listed, is shown in purple areas, and it'll give you a sense of where it is. And you can see how in areas that they're closely related to each other, actually geographically. And it's kind of like that handoff from one network to the other. When it comes to habit formation. So this default mode network has one of its hubs here, and then it also has a hub here on the parietal areas too of the brain, right? So the default mode network is this neural network that supports habit formation, and it frees up the frontal cortex and that dorsal attention network to be able to solve immediate problems, to be able to respond to new things, while we're also able to engage in those daily habits that we encounter, and even some complex daily habits like driving a car, right? So we're able to not have to think really focused and intently for driving to our office, maybe, that we go to all of the time, or to our child's pediatrician's office or the grocery store, but we might have to focus more on if we're trying to go to a new place, right? We still have some basic but the basic ability to be able to drive a car, to automate that response, allows us then to be able to lay on another cognitive task of finding a new place, listening to new directions, sometimes handing snacks back to children, changing the radio, changing the windshield wipers, all of that at the same time, because the process of driving itself has been more automated. So it's that give and take between what's immediate and what has been established. All right. One thing that's really important to note, guys, is that stress really impacts this whole process. So in a nutshell, stress is going to shut down that dorsal attention network. It's going to shut down any idea of a new response or problem solving. And what's going to happen is, instead, it's the default mode network that is relied on under stress. In stressful times, we do what we know in a similar situation, and we stay in that rut. We keep doing the same thing, even if it's not working, under stress. And that's a really important thing to note for families. As we get stuck in old paths and habits, it's really hard to build new ones, and it's really hard to actively problem solve when we are under stress. And that's just the basic functioning and structure of our neuro makeup. All right, so now that we've got this understanding of where these where habits are formed and why they're formed in the brain, let's move on, and then we're going to get ready for some engagement. We're going to do a case study to be able to apply some of these ideas. So let's get into that habit science, the laws of habit science that are founded on this neuroscience research. All right.
Lorelei, you have a clarifying question in the chat too.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So let me see. So let's see. So when starting a new habit, the focus of visual attention works. Once it becomes an actual habit, the action, etc., transfers to the default mode network. So when we're starting a new habit, that the attention network, right? That dorsal attention network, something new comes in, we're trying to do something new, right? So for example, I might be trying to crochet. I've been trying to learn to do that. And it involves, moving my thread, using the needles, all of those kinds of things. So when I'm starting a new habit, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking very clearly about what's happening. over frequent repetitions, that becomes automated and it transfers it to that default mode network. Remember how they're kind of closely linked, particularly in that prefrontal area of the brain, and it transfers it over to that default mode network so that now it's a habit and we don't have to think about it. I could actually one day maybe crochet while talking, while watching a movie, while doing something else. But right now, while it's in the dorsal attention network, I have to give extreme focus. Does that help? Oh, good question, Suzanne, and they're all good questions, but yeah, great. You're welcome. So what we know about the data on how many times a stimulus has to be, and it's more than perceiving, so stimulus has to be responded to, right? So you actually have to engage in that behavior to make the habit form. So you have to perceive that there's a chance to do the behavior, the stimulus came through. You have to do the behavior, you have to get the reward, and then there has to be another cue for it to keep happening again, right? So over and over, it's actually not about the number of times, it's about the, it's not about the span of time, it's about the frequency. So it's the number of opportunities to be able to learn a new habit. So that practice makes perfect. It's really about that wiring together, neurons that wire together, fire together. You're really training that. You're building those neural networks to fire together, and that takes frequency and repetition. The actual numbers, though, are based on the complexity of the task. There's not just like a generic amount of numbers of repetition or frequency that are needed, because some tasks are require less frequency and then others require more due to the complexity of it. But good question. It is, but it is, you're hit on the nose. It's all about frequency and repetition. Any other questions right now before we go into how to make these habits work? All right. And thank you, Lisa, for showing me that. All right, so we're going to next talk about and then really apply these 4 laws of habit science. Again, these are built on well-established principles of behavior science, as well as the newer neuroscience research that really support and show that these principles have actually been accurate and why they're accurate. All right, so let's go into number 1. Make it obvious. All right, before we do though, I forgot, we're going to learn about Sammy. He is our case, and we'll be applying these through thinking about Sammy and his family. So let's look at what they've got going on. All right, so Sammy's outcome, or one of Sammy's outcomes that we're focusing on now, he's 20 months old, is that Sammy will feed himself 3 different finger foods, chewing and swallowing the food during dinner with his family 5 evenings per week for 2 weeks. The focus during the visit that we're going to pretend we just did with the family we're engaged in. The provider observed the lunch routine. Sammy refused foods with a variety of textures that were fed by spoon and pushed away finger food. He drank milk from a sippy cup. He ate puree from a pouch. His dad modeled smelling the food on his plate, positive emotions in response to tasting the food, and offering Sammy a fork to poke foods on the tray. The provider and dad at this point had some conversations about expanding Sammy's exposure to different sensory, to different textures and different sensory information to try to help him expand, because they believe it's a sensory-based issue right now. So their joint plan, after they've talked through some things, they worked through some things in the visit, Dad says that he and Mom and Grandma are going to increase Sammy's exposure to a variety of textures during toy play, outdoor play, and book reading. So they've made their joint plan. They know what they're going to do. They know what routines they're going to put it in, and what this kind of increasing exposure to sensory information is to a variety of textures. All right. Now let's look at that principle 1 of 4 of habit science. And in each one of these, I'm going to talk to you about what the principle is, and then we're going to look at applying it to Sammy's joint plan. So one of the things that I realized when I was going through this is that the coaching process and routines-based intervention really, and adult learning, all of those things really align very well already as they're written with this law number 1 of make it obvious. Habits are initiated by a cue that we perceive through our senses and are interpreted in the prefrontal cortex, like I explained before. And a lot of times when we're doing this work with families, we think about the activity or the routine as that cue that the family is perceiving as their like stimulus to initiate this new task they're supposed to be doing as part of that activity. So that sensory exploration that they're going to be doing and including in here. Perhaps it's wait times. Think of some of those strategies that families have talked about wanting to try, that then we're tying that cue of that routine to that new strategy or behavior that the family is going to try to do. And so this law of habit science tells us to make that cue as obvious as possible, which we do with the routine by tying it to that. So what we would need to do though, So here you can see that in coaching terms, we call the joint plan as when a family says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it at this time, the when, where, and how of their between visit plan. In behavior science, that term for joint plan is really just intention. What is it that the person intends to do? They're planning ahead to say, this is what I want to do. In habit science, for make it obvious, you develop just a formula. I will, whatever the behavior is, at a particular time in a particular location. And the time and the location is what you want to tie it to a routine or an activity. In early intervention terms, it's the family or dad will do whatever the behavior is related to sensory exploration during this routine or activity, right? Another thing that early intervention does so well is not just help make the cue obvious. We're already doing this principle or this strategy called habit stacking. And that's when we say, not only we take this intention and tie it to routine or activity, but we make it really clear that we're adding this new behavior to something that has already happened. It's much easier to add something to an already established routine that's already automated than it is to create a whole new routine, right? So that's why we longer support kind of the idea of a family making sure that they add a time to practice things out of context, but that they add opportunities within an already established routine and they have that context there. So again, early intervention, we're doing pretty well on this. However, we're still, right? Many of us are here because we're still having that frustration with, we still aren't able to help families get to the place of being able to build the capacity to actually be able to implement them all the time, particularly when families are multi-stressed, as you often are with an infant or a toddler, and particularly one who might have some health or developmental delays. So what we want to do in this situation is move to, I'm so excited. I want to move through it all. Now let's talk about making it obvious with Sammy, just so we can make sure we're all on the same page with this part. So we want to increase Sammy's exposure to a variety of textures during toy play, outdoor play, book reading, and bath, right? That was the joint intention or joint plan and the intention that was set earlier. But now we need to make it obvious intention. So we're going to really work on our wording on this one to be able to set it up into that formula that makes it obvious, really makes that cue very clear for families of the routine. And it's going to be very specific. So what exactly is the behavior? Dad will roll a textured ball back and forth with Sammy while waiting for Big Brother to get off the bus in the front yard. All right, so you can see how it's a very specific behavior related to the exposure to textures. And the routine is here, right here. So the cue is very specific. And then we're going to habit stack it too. After dad puts on shoes and jackets to go outside. So that's their typical thing that they do. Routine, they go to the foyer, they put on their shoes and their jackets. He's going to bring that textured ball along with them to roll with Sammy. So not only are we going to say that this is the routine and how you're going to do it, but we're also going to stack it to another behavior or cue that he's already doing, right? Tie those two together. And I really recommend, I'll show you later, but I do really recommend taking note cards with you and just writing these along so that families can then just tape them to the places that they're doing them, because I do that myself to cue, to make my cue even more obvious. All right. So what could be an obvious intention for mom? So mom typically does the bath time and the bedtime routines. So if we were to take either of those of your choice and to think about how you could make sensory exploration obvious with a cue for bedtime or bath time, and stack it to a behavior that goes with one of those. If you could put into chat some ideas you might have here. So mom will, what could mom do? Let's take bath time, right? What could mom do with Sammy during bath time that would help Sammy explore other textures and would be specific to that routine? One that I thought of is adding some scents too, so some like essential oil smells to the bath. Carrie says, mom will create and pop bubbles using soap in the bathtub during bath time. Absolutely. And bubbles even also have a little bit of sound exploration too, right? In the bathtub. Mom will add bubbles to the bath. We love bubbles. Yes, washcloths and loofahs. Those definitely have some texture differences. Textured toys, right? You can also add those. Sponges and loofahs. Yeah, exactly. So mom is going to be able to, if we think about the make it obvious intention, we're going to take these ideas we have, right, of different things we can add, and we're going to put it there. Where is she going to do it? Is she going to do it with him at the beginning of bath? What part of it is she going to do it when she adds water to the tub? Is she going to do it, when she puts all the toys into the tub? Is she going to do it during wash time? Is there a part of a song mom might sing during it that she's going to add some of these in a playful way? We want to make sure that it's very, a washboard for washing clothes. Yeah, that has lots of good sensory information coming in. I hadn't thought about that one too. And then Lauren added in too about adding the literacy component here for adding, if we thought about bedtime, adding some textured books to bedtime too. Maybe particularly even textures that Sammy finds calming would be great. And then again, just making sure that we're habit stacking it. So we're thinking at what part of each routine, what particular part is it going to be added? So it's not just during bath time. It's not just during book reading or bedtime. It's when exactly, or not just during bedtime, it's during book reading, right? So where exactly is that texture going to be added in? Mm-hmm. Oh, Corey likes to stretch and stuff. I do too, Corey. And the markers as well. All right. So we've got one, and I think as early interventionist and use a coaching process, I think we're pretty solid on one, right? Make it attractive is one that I think, starting with laws 2, 3, and 4, that I think we can tweak our joint plans to really be able to apply this cognitive neuroscience to help families build their capacity to implement these things. So earlier on, I told you about that reward that comes into a play when we try out a new behavior and we do something and it works. However, whatever we did, we interpret it as working. So that's just part of making it attractive, right? We want to help families who are the person initiating this habit change to start anticipating a reward, a desire, to start craving it. And that's because the dopamine cycle, how the dopamine cycle works is that we don't just get a reward of this dopamine kick, this neurotransmitter that makes us feel good. We don't just get that when we're doing the activity that we enjoy and that we crave. So say it's like eating ice cream, right? We don't just get that really good feeling of eating ice cream when we're eating the ice cream. We also get it when we're thinking about eating ice cream. That's the crave, right? That's when the desire is there. And we actually get that craving too then. And that, for example, with addiction research, people who are addicted to cigarettes, for example, can get a craving and even get a hit of dopamine as they see somebody else smoke, or they look at and see their cigarettes sitting on the table. Whereas a non-smoker who doesn't engage in that wouldn't get that same, doesn't have that same association and wouldn't have that same desire or craving. So one of the things that we want to do out of using the principles of habit science is to try something called temptation bundling, so that we're able to help build this joint plan, this new behavior that's happening, to pair it up with a dopamine response or a reward. So the parent starts to anticipate a kick in, a desire, builds that craving that comes with doing the activity with the child. And it's an immediate dopamine, right? It's not thinking, you know, in 3 weeks, once my child's more independent, this will feel really good. It has to be a really immediate kind of behavior to build this attraction. Because we know with families, right, they're already motivated to do their best with children and to think ahead of what they need. But the immediacy of stress and exhaustion and all of that, our bodies meet our immediate needs more often than our long-term needs. So you need to tie it to that. All right. So what this visual here is shows you, right, that you once you've gotten the reward for a behavior, and you start associating this behavior with the reward, here's where the craving comes in. You start to crave it. Here's when you crave it and you don't get the reward. You actually don't feel very good. And here's when you crave it, you do the behavior and you get, this is when you don't actually engage in the activity. So say the person who was smoking saw the cigarettes, felt a kick of dopamine. They go, but wait, there's no cigarettes left in the pack. It starts to feel really bad, right? But here, it's when you see the cigarettes and you come over and you get to smoke and you get that kick as well. So that's what that means in terms of the dopamine response. Wait, did I miss? Oh no, here we go. All right, so make it attractive. Temptation bundling. So after a new behavior, this is how temptation bundling works, to be able to make this new behavior desirable, something that the parent craves on a physiological level. The formula for that is after the new behavior. So for dad, that's right, rolling the ball, the textured ball, or for mom, that might be adding bubbles to the bath. Then you get to do something that you want to do or that already feels good to you. So to do that, this is when we really customize to families. We have to talk to them and get, like, that's that relationship building part that, again, I think we generally do pretty well. And we want to take that and apply it to this joint planning process and think about, how can I get dad to think about what he, of course, yes, applying it to ourselves. After, what is dad going to link to this to get out of this? And what are the things he likes? And then the same for mom, right? So dad has his likes, mom's got her likes too. And then later, if we think about grandma's got things she likes to do too. So we want to keep thinking about those when we're helping families build out these joint plans. So past our intention, past our habit stacking of adding it to a routine, we want to make it attractive and make this individualized. So for Sammy, remembering going back to his joint plan, if we bundle for dad, we add a temptation and it's add a craving, dad's going to start associating. Dad loves to shoot hoops. He's active. There's a hoop out there in the driveway. Dad's going to start pairing. Dad decides to start pairing this rolling the ball with Sammy with then being able to take some shots himself, right? So he's building in a little time for himself that gives him something good to anticipate and the immediacy. All right, let's go back to mom and bath time or bedtime, whichever one you wanted to focus on and we're thinking about. What are some ways to make it attractive for mom? And let's go back and look at what mom likes. Mom loves cuddle time, stories, music, and toy play. Those are things that she really enjoys. So what are some ways we can make this attractive for mom? Corey would be adding some dark chocolate to it. See that? I tend to add coffee to most things. All right, Suzanne says, after bath, she puts him in a snuggly and gets some snuggle time. So yeah, she's pairing that. All right, we're going to do that sensory play during bath, but then I'm going to get some really nice, warm, cozy snuggles. And she's going to start thinking about that, right? The cuddle and the soft, yep, playing peekaboo, because mom loves that playtime. That really feels really good to her. I see the textured blankets, bath with sensory activities and cuddle time. Singing, right? Because mom enjoys singing. Adding those things in into some of these can really, really help. So they're not going to be huge dopamine kicks, but there are ways of, but again, like as Corey said, being able to add in just a little bit of dark chocolate while you're adding that to the bath while you're sitting there watching and playing with your child. Like there are different ways to be able just to add in a little something that you crave and that you love to the routine to make it more neurologically attractive in the moment. All right. Any questions so far? I love the belly laugh. Yeah, Lisa, that does get me every time. Scented lotion, Carrie. Yeah. So any questions so far about temptation bundling and why and making it attractive? It looks like you guys have some wheels spinning, perhaps already, and thinking of how you can add this into your joint plans. I'll keep an eye out for questions as they come in. Also, let's move on to principle 3, and this is make it easy. All right, and again, I think this is something that we think a lot about, but if we don't give those joint plans enough time, at the end of sessions, we might feel too rushed to actually be able to implement the step. So I really want us to think about, how we even give the joint plan at the end enough time to be able to have it, stack it with the routine, temptation bundle it, to be able to say, all right, so what are you going to add to this to make it fun for you, mom or dad, grandma? And then to spend the time with them to think about how, before we leave, we can make sure that this is easy for the family to be able to do, or easier, because adding anything within reason isn't always, or it can be hard. So here are some principles associated with principle 3. One is we want to make sure that we just help families actually just show up for the behavior or the action that they say they're going to do, show up for that sensory play during that routine for a very short period of time, so that even just the act of showing up for it and doing it for a short time becomes habitual. And then we can shape that once we get there, right? So we're not going to go through a full out, sensory expanded playroom experience, right? We're going to start really small in a way that the family can easily show up during that routine. And a lot of times we have to help families bring this back, right? Really think about, because in the intention in the moment, right? Our intentions are often, what are all of the things I can do to help my baby or help my toddler? And then in the moment, when we're unable to do the big thing, we can start feeling really badly about ourselves, or at least I'll speak from experience. I can start feeling really badly about myself and being able to do it, especially when I feel like it is really important for my child. Like initially when I talked about turning the expander, the key, in my child's mouth every night, I feel really guilty when I forget to do that because I know how important it is. So how can we help them just show up to do it? And they, Clear, the guy who wrote Atomic Habits, calls this the 2-minute rule. And he also says that you want to standardize before you optimize. So you're going to keep that phrase in mind, to standardize before you optimize. You want to get the parent used to showing up for the activity, showing up for the routine before you expand it and make it into the full-blown intention that perhaps is needed to really make that family's priority happen. So that's one. We also want to set up that environment for the family before we leave. So with dad and the sensory balls and bringing it, making sure, like going right then, if dad's tied it to getting shoes and socks on, let's get the balls, let's put them in a bin right by the door, right? if we also want to be doing these things to set up the environment so that we move from a planning phase. We're already with the parent. We're moving from planning, that brain in motion, to actually body in action. So if we help get the environment ready and everything set up and make sure that's there before we walk out the door, then we're priming that parent for action and taking down on the activity, or sorry, the actual amount of motion required before they can do the action. All right, let's look at it in terms of Sammy. So Sammy, we've got our intention, stays the same. The make it obvious intention with dad. And as I said, oh, wait, I'm sorry. That was supposed to say, guys, I'm sorry. That was supposed to say for dad that he is going to, we're going to put those by the door. We're going to make it easy by putting things there and getting them ready. How can we make it easy for mom? Say for bath time. How can we make things easy there as we're planning through, right? What could we do to turn it into something mom can move from planning to action? A lot of times it's just environmental arrangement. Sometimes it's just talking through the sequence steps. The parent's brain is primed. You guys talked about snuggle blankets and towels. And so it's really just having those objects there. Yeah, the sensory cloth's already near the tub. You've got the loofah. If you have a baby in the tub, you can't usually go and get the other things, right? Prepare a caddy. I love that, Tina, right? So everything is right there with you. And we can help the family do that before we leave, right? All right. Make it satisfying. This is our last principle. And this one, it just really speaks to me in the work that we do with families, because it's a way to really help us build up a family's confidence. Some of the research that's come out through using functional MRIs, so we're really actually being able to look at the brain while it's doing certain things, and then to compare and see which areas of the brain are active during different tasks, has shown us that people who feel confident with something actually tend to implement their habits more than people who actually have the competent skills. So even if, so for example, people who are well trained in yoga, for example, yoga and meditation and mindfulness, versus people who feel confident that they can implement mindfulness practices. People who just feel confident that they can do it are actually more likely to keep implementing those practices and make it more frequent than people who might just be well trained but don't really feel very confident with it, if there's that gap. And what we're doing when we help families show up with their intention, building those 2-minute rules of getting in, getting there, getting them into motion, then getting those practice opportunities, right? Then we're helping to pair that confidence gap, or pair that confidence with that building up their competence. And then that together builds their capacity to be able to do this, implement this when we're not there. So confidence building is really important, and and it feels good, right? So when we are able to implement it and we do it and our baby's laughing, as Lisa said, and you get those giggles, like, it feels good. It's satisfying. You did the thing you set out to do. We build up that confidence. They're more likely to do it, to feel good about it, to associate positive emotion with it. And one of the ways that we want to also make it feel really good, besides just really setting those small goals and really celebrating their confidence, are their small wins for showing up and building their confidence, is we want to help the habit fit the family. And what I mean by that, oops, sorry, we're going back to this one. I thought I had another part there. We want to look at the families again, their personalities, their relationships, their values, even things like their energy levels. Are they social? Do they like relaxing? Do they prefer calmness? Are they list writers who like to write things off and check things off a list? What are their preferences? What feels good to them? And we want to help make the habit in that way fit the family and make it satisfying. So really thinking of that when we're helping families flesh out these plans. And another really important thing I think to do in how we talk with families and in how we talk with ourselves and about families is really focusing on the system and not the person. And I think that's what habit science really offers us, is that perspective to think in a systematic way about something that can be very challenging and we can often really personalize. So when we focus on the system and we think of how can we make this more attractive, and without blame, right? It's every parent has the best intention. How do we make it attractive in the initial part with bundling? How do we make it easy? How do we make it satisfying? And how do we build confidence along the way? What systemic tools do we have or strategies do we have to do that? It takes the focus off of the family and that making it the personalizing of it. So let's look at Sammy quickly, and we are going to wrap up. So with Sammy, Lisa says she's had families where the mother feels more confident bath time and the father feels more confident bedtime, and they switched responsibilities. Yeah, so they're able to do it based on what felt good to them and where they felt successful, and then that in of itself builds momentum, right? And builds an anticipation of something that you know you can do well. You're more likely to do it. So for Sammy, how could we make this more satisfying? One of Dad's so in this, I was thinking, since we're short on time, I'll kind of fill in. Dad's really, active. And so we added, we made this, what Dad was doing part of his active components of his day. And Mom, she's out all day. She really loves that snuggle evening time with him. So really making it, part of that evening routine that she starts really feeling so good. She's snuggled, she's getting all the warm and fuzzies, right? She's getting those cozy snugglies in. And she also feels really good about herself because she's put in something that's helped her child expand his abilities and is getting him closer to their family priority of being able to be receptive to other textures, especially when he's eating. So just some takeaways, y'all. As I said, I bring along note cards. I have them all over my house too for new things. This works with children. It works with spouses too. I bring bright markers, all of that, and it really helps. You bring the note cards, the bright markers, and the tape, and you get it where they need it. I take stress into account. I remember how stress shuts us down. It's just neurological. That's right. So we have to make sure that, as we know, we really work to, and coaching is to try to make sure that families aren't taking on too much when they joint plan, that they're taking their own stress into account, that they understand how it can impact things, and we're really helping them start small in places where they can feel successful and it can feel satisfying. So, and when we're doing a new habit, particularly in times of stress, we want to focus on showing up, right? Standardize before you optimize. Just get it for a moment and then shape it. We want to focus on success and satisfaction, small wins, positive emotions, and we want to focus on confidence before competence. These are some references that I have really sunk into if you want to explore a little bit more. Emily, remembering to guide families not to take on too much. Absolutely. That's one I try to really keep in mind too, even with, again, with my own children too, and myself. I think we can all probably use that as a reminder too. All right. Are there any, I'll let Lisa go ahead and close. And if there are other questions, please feel free to type them in and I can make sure I get
Yeah, thank you, Lorelei. I love the neuroscience behind this. I think that this is an excellent webinar. And so for those of you that are curious, you will be able to access this archived webinar on our site once it is posted. So feel free to go back to access the recording or access the handouts. Just so you know what's coming up next, we will have our October Talks on Tuesday. That is going to be on October 1st. So go ahead and save the date. The constant contact should be going out shortly. And that is going to be all about understanding how to support families who were recently diagnosed with Fragile X syndrome. So definitely stay tuned for that. What's going to happen next with the survey? In order to get your certificate, go ahead and check your inbox. And from there, you'll see a link to complete the survey. Once you complete the survey, you will be able to download your certificate. Please make sure that you download your own certificate since we do not keep track of those for you. And again, Lorelei, thank you so much. If you all have any questions, feel free to type them into chat, but this was so wonderful. I feel like I learned so much and there's so much that I want to start implementing, so thank you.
Thanks all.